Mr. Clemens, once again, I remind you, you're under oath. You have said your conversation with Mr. Pettit never happened. If that was true, why would Laura Pettit remember Andy telling her about the conversation?
Once again, Mr. Clemens, I think he misremembers the conversation that we had. Andy and I's relationship was close enough to know that if I would have known that he had done HGH, which I now know, that if he was knowingly knowing that I had taken HGH, we would have talked about the subject. He'd have come to me to ask me about the effects of it.
Well, the fact is, Mr. Clemens, that apparently now you know he knew it, and he didn't tell you as your mind thinks about his credibility.
Andy's a fine gentleman. I have no reason, again,
Well.
I think he misremembers.
Very well. Let me go on.
Again, our relationship was close enough that if he knew that I had tried HGH, which I hadn't, and he would have come to me and talked to me and discussed this subject.
I understand. In 1999 or 2000 conversations is not the only conversation that Mr. Pettit remembers having with you about HGH. He also remembers a second conversation very clearly. This conversation took place in 2005. Let me read to you what he wrote about this conversation in his affidavit. In 2000, and I quote, in 2005, around the time of the congressional hearings into the use of performance-enhancing drugs in baseball, I had a conversation with Roger Clemens in Kissimmee, Florida. I asked him what he would say if asked by reporters if he had ever used performance-enhancing drugs. When he asked what I meant, I reminded him that he had told me that he had used HGH. Roger responded by telling me that I must have misunderstood him. He claimed that it was his wife, Debbie, who used HGH. And I said, okay, or words to that effect, not because I agreed with him, but because I wasn't going to argue with him. This conversation happened just 3 years ago, and it is the kind of conversation that most people would remember. It is hard for me to imagine that Mr. Pettit made up this conversation. Did you have a conversation with him to this effect?
I don't believe I had a conversation in 2005 with him in Kissimmee, Florida. We'd have been with the Houston Astros at the time. But I don't remember that conversation whatsoever.
Are you saying that you don't remember it, or are you telling us that you didn't have it? Do you know? And the reason why I'm asking you that is because we're dealing with some serious matters here, and I want to give you wanted a fair chance to address this committee, and I'm just wondering, are you telling us under oath that it didn't happen, or you're saying you just don't remember?
I don't remember that, and again, I'll address any conversation about my wife Debbie using HGH. I know that at one point she read a USA Today article about that. I don't know the year. It sure could have been 2005 when this article came about. And they just, that it was just general talk.
All right.
About HGH.
Let me go on. Laura Pettit also has a clear recollection of being told about this conversation by her husband. Let me read what she wrote. A few years later, I believe in 2005, Andy again told me of a conversation with Roger Clemens about HGH. Andy told me that he had been thinking that if a reporter asked him, he would tell the reporter of his own use of HGH in 2002. He said that he told Roger Clemens this and asked Roger what he would say if asked. Andy told me that in the 2005 conversation, Roger denied using HGH and told Andy that Andy was mistaken about their earlier conversation. According to Andy, Roger said that it was his wife, Debbie, who used HGH. Now, the timeline is very important here. According to Mr. Pettit, his first conversation with you, Mr. Clemens, occurred in 1999 or 2000. But you told us that your wife did not use HGH until 2003. That makes it impossible that you could have been referring to your wife's use of HGH in the first conversation. These aren't the only relevant conversations that Mr. Pettit told us about. He told us that after his first conversation with you, Mr. Clemens, he spoke with Mr. McNamee. Let me read let me read to you again that affidavit. And I quote, shortly after my conversation with Roger, I spoke with Brian McNamee. Only he and I were parties to the conversation. I asked Roger about HGH and told him that Roger said he had used it. Brian McNamee became angry. He told me that Roger should not have told me about his use of HGH because it was supposed to be confidential. Mr. McNamee, do you remember that conversation?
Yes, sir.
Did it happen?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Cummings, your time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair now